Every conqueror has an origin, a moment before the legend, before the battles, before the empire, before the name meant anything to anyone. Alexander was 10 years old when two people decided who he was going to be. His mother told him he was a god. His father told him he was nothing. Both of them were wrong, and both of them were right. And that contradiction, that impossible space between a god and nothing, is where Alexander the Great was born, and where he eventually broke. Let's talk about the household first, because what happened to Alexander before any battle explains everything that happened after. His father was Philip II of Macedon, one of the greatest military minds in history, a fact that is almost always forgotten because his son eclipsed him so completely. Philip built the army Alexander used to conquer the world. The phalanx, the tactics, the discipline, all Philip. But Philip was also a drunk, a serial philanderer, a man who had 7 wives and made sure every single one of them knew they were replaceable. Olympias was wife number 4, and she was not the kind of woman who accepted being replaceable. She was Epirote, from a royal line that traced itself to Achilles, fierce, politically lethal, and absolutely obsessed with her son. From the moment Alexander was born, Olympias had a plan. She told him his real father was not Philip. His real father was Zeus Ammon, a god. She performed religious rituals in their chambers, kept sacred serpents, symbols of divine connection, filled his childhood with prophecy and destiny before he was old enough to question any of it. And Philip? Philip looked at this boy, this serious, intense, already frighteningly intelligent boy, and felt something complicated. Pride, certainly, but also something that looked a lot like fear, because Philip could see it too. This boy was going to be something Philip couldn't control. So Philip did what threatened men do. He pushed him away, criticized him, compared him, brought other sons into the picture, from other wives, as if to say, you are not the only option. Alexander grew up in a palace where his mother told him he was divine, and his father treated him like a rival. Think about what that does to a child. Think about what that builds inside a person. A hunger that can never be filled. Because nothing is ever enough for someone who was told they were a god and then treated like they were nothing. When Alexander was 13, Philip did something right, possibly the most important thing he ever did for his son. He hired Aristotle, not a tutor, not a teacher. Aristotle, the greatest mind of the ancient world, philosophy, biology, politics, ethics, poetry, the man who had thought seriously about everything. For 3 years, Alexander sat with Aristotle in the gardens of Mysa. And Aristotle did something neither Philip nor Olympias had done. He treated Alexander like a mind worth developing. Not a weapon, not a divine instrument, a mind. He gave Alexander Homer's Iliad. Alexander read it like scripture. Achilles became his model, his obsession. Glory, honor, a short life burned bright rather than a long life lived in obscurity. Aristotle also gave him something more dangerous: curiosity. Alexander wanted to know everything about everywhere, every culture, every religion, every way of organizing a society. He took scientists and historians on his campaigns. He wanted to understand the world, not just conquer it. But Aristotle also left a gap. He never taught Alexander how to be wrong, how to lose, how to sit with failure and survive it. Because in Alexander's world, losing wasn't an option. His mother had made sure of that. Gods don't lose. Pella Pallas. Night. Alexander was 14 years old when his father humiliated him in front of the entire court. Philip had just announced the birth of another son, a new heir, a real heir. And Alexander stood there listening while the nobles laughed and drank around him. He didn't say anything. Later that night, he sat alone in his room, staring at the wall in silence while the sounds of the palace echoed faintly outside his door. Then, for the first time in his life, Alto appeared. A voice emerged from the darkness. That had to hurt. Alexander jolted upright. There was a man standing in the corner of the room, half hidden in shadow. "Who are you?" Alexander asked. The stranger didn't move. "Doesn't matter," he said calmly. "Sit down." Alexander's expression hardened. "I'll call the guards." "You won't." Something in the man's voice stopped him. Not fear, certainty. Alexander slowly sat back down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alto stepped slightly forward. "Your mother is using you," he said. "The prophecies, the snakes, the son of Zeus story. That was never a gift. It was a weapon against your father." Alexander's jaw tightened. "And your father," Alto continued. "He pushes you away because you terrify him. Neither of them is telling you the truth." The room felt colder now. "So I will." Alto looked directly at him. "You are not a god. And the day you truly believe you are is the day you start losing everything." Alexander felt something twist inside him. Anger, humiliation, confusion. He wanted to throw the man out, wanted to scream at him, wanted him gone. Instead, he asked quietly, "Why are you telling me this?" Alto turned toward the door. "Because everyone else in your life has something to gain from you believing the lie." He started walking away. Alexander watched him disappear into the darkness before finally speaking again. "Will I see you again?" Alto stopped at the door. "Unfortunately." Then he was gone. Forget the empire for a second. Forget the maps, the campaigns, the cities he founded. Think about the man. There's a version of Alexander, one conversation away from existing, who knows he's human, not less, not weaker, just human. And that version of him doesn't sit alone in a tent in India crying because his army won't follow him further. Because that version of him would have looked at those tired faces and seen people, not obstacles. Would have said, "We've done enough, let's go home." And meant it, without it breaking something inside him. That version of him doesn't pick up a spear at a dinner in Samarkand and drive it through Clytus. Clytus, who saved his life at Granicus, who took a sword blow meant for him. That version of him walks away from the argument, goes to sleep angry, wakes up the next morning and sits with his oldest friend over breakfast and says nothing. Because some things don't need to be won. And that version of him looks at Hephaestion one day and says, "If something happens to me, I need you to make sure my son is protected. Promise me." Not because he's planning to die, because he knows he might, because he's human. And humans make plans for the people they love. That's it. That's what changes. Not the battles, not the strategy. A man who knows he can be wrong doesn't have to be right about everything. Doesn't have to push until something breaks. Doesn't have to drink until the silence stops. He can just stop, breathe, look at what he's built, and let it be enough. Alexander the Great never learned how to let anything be enough, and it cost him everything. Not his empire, himself. But nobody came. Alexander grew up between a mother who called him divine and a father who called him replaceable. And he chose, or was forced to choose, to believe both simultaneously. He was divine, and he had to prove it every single day for the rest of his life. At 16, Philip left him as regent of Macedon. He immediately crushed a rebellion and founded his first city, named it after himself, Alexandropolis. He was 16. At 18, he commanded the decisive cavalry charge at Cheronea that broke the Greek alliance. Philip looked at him across the battlefield and felt for the first time, something that wasn't fear. Something that looked like pride. It came too late. 2 years later, Philip was assassinated. Some say Olympias was involved. Alexander never investigated too hard. He was 20 years old, and the world was his. But the hunger was still there. Bigger now, louder, and still, nobody telling him the truth. This is where it begins. Not at Gaugamela, not at the Hellespont. Here, in a palace bedroom in Pella, with a boy who was handed 2 impossible stories and told to become both of them. He almost did. That's what makes it magnificent. That's what makes it tragic. In the next episode, Alexander is no longer a boy. He has crossed into Asia. He has beaten Darius. He is wearing Persian robes in a Macedonian court, and his generals are beginning to whisper. Alto will be back, because the next mistake Saudi is already forming. Subscribe, notifications on episode 2 is coming.